Headlines scream of a president's rage as the White House unleashes a punishing 35% tariff on its closest ally. Where Europe sought a quick deal to escape the pressure, Canada chose a different path: defiance. Prime Minister Mark Carney has unveiled a quiet countermove, a strategy of economic self-defense designed to call the president's bluff and withstand the storm. In a world accustomed to seeing nations bow to American pressure, Canada is standing tall. How did America's quietest ally learn to stand up and fight back? For nearly a century, the map of Canadian trade had only one primary direction: south. The United States was more than a partner. It was the entire economic ecosystem, an intricate network of pipelines, railways, and supply chains fused the two nations into a single continental market. For Canadian energy, agriculture, and manufacturing, America was the default and often only customer. This created a profound economic dependence, a reality that for decades was seen as the bedrock of Canadian prosperity. But under the America First doctrine, this foundation of trust began to erode. The Trump administration viewed Canada's dependence not as a feature of a partnership, but as a weakness to be exploited. A new playbook emerged: apply overwhelming economic pressure to force allies into quick, favorable deals. This strategy seemed to work with the European Union, which agreed to a framework to de-escalate trade tensions. Washington expected Canada to follow suit, to gratefully accept a similar off-ramp. When Ottawa hesitated, the White House grew frustrated. The relationship became increasingly confrontational, with the U.S. using the threat of tariffs as a constant weapon. The unwritten rule of mutual respect was replaced by a new reality of raw power politics. The stage was set for a dramatic test of wills, one that would pit America's belief in its own dominance against Canada's quiet determination to forge its own path. On August 1st, 2025, the threat became a reality. After weeks of escalating rhetoric, President Trump unleashed his ultimate weapon against Canada. A new, punishing 35% tariff was imposed on all Canadian goods not strictly compliant with the USMCA. The public justifications from the White House were a chaotic mix of grievances, ranging from national security to blaming Canada for a minuscule fraction of the U.S. fentanyl crisis. But the real reason was leverage. Having secured a framework agreement with the European Union, the administration was infuriated by Canada's refusal to accept a similar deal. Trump saw Canada's hesitation as a personal slight and its independent stance as an obstacle to his agenda. The 35% tariff was designed to be the knockout blow. It was significantly higher than the roughly 15% rate that the EU had faced, a clear signal that this was punitive. The calculation in Washington was brutally simple. Canada's economy, with 70% of its exports tied to the US, was uniquely vulnerable. The White House believed that this level of economic pain would create an immediate crisis, shatter Canada's resolve, and force Prime Minister Mark Carney to come to the table, ready to sign any deal to make the pain stop. It was a strategy built on the core assumption that Canada, when faced with overwhelming force, would have no choice but to surrender. It was a colossal miscalculation. In Ottawa, there was no panic. There was a plan. Instead of capitulating or launching a full-blown tariff war it could not win, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government executed a bold and multifaceted counter-move of quiet defiance. This was Canada's call of the American bluff. The first step was a strategic refusal to engage in Trump's manufactured hysteria. Carney publicly stated that while the tariffs were disappointing, his government would not be rushed into a bad deal. This immediately took the power out of Trump's deadline-driven tactics. Secondly, Canada resisted the urge for massive tit-for-tat retaliation. With an economy 1/10 the size of America's, Canadian leaders understood that a full-scale trade war would be an act of economic self-immolation. Instead, the government turned its focus inward, launching the most significant domestic economic fortification in a generation. It passed legislation like Bill C-202, a a law specifically designed to protect Canada's supply-managed sectors like dairy and poultry, shielding them from being used as bargaining chips in future trade negotiations. It also introduced the One Canadian Economy Act, a landmark bill aimed at finally dismantling the long-standing trade barriers between Canada's own provinces, a move designed to boost internal trade and make the domestic economy more resilient. This political leadership was amplified by a powerful grassroots movement. The Buy Canadian campaign exploded into a national phenomenon. Polls showed that 91% of Canadians now wanted to reduce their country's economic dependence on the US, and 85% were actively choosing Canadian products over American ones. Merchandise with the slogan, "Canada is not for sale," became a symbol of national pride. It was a silent but powerful rebellion, a whole-of-society effort to withstand the storm by strengthening from within. This has created a bizarre and tense stalemate. President Trump has fired his biggest economic weapon, but it has failed to produce the desired effect. Instead of triggering a crisis in Canada, it has sparked a wave of national unity and strategic realignment. Canada is absorbing the economic hit while fundamentally re-engineering its economy to be less dependent on the United States. The White House is now faced with an opponent who refuses to play by its rules. Canada has called Trump's bluff, choosing to endure short-term pain in exchange for long-term sovereignty. The administration can keep the tariffs in place, inflicting continued damage on its own consumers and businesses, or it can back down, a move that would be seen as a major political defeat. The two neighbors are now locked in a war of attrition, a battle between America's raw power and Canada's quiet, stubborn resilience. Canada's strategy of quiet resilience is a stand for national sovereignty, but that stand is not without cost. For an apparel manufacturer in Quebec, the 35% tariff is a direct and painful blow. Her company makes premium winter coats, a symbol of Canadian quality. But because she uses high-performance zippers from Germany, her product doesn't meet the strict letter of the USMCA's rules of origin. For years, this was a manageable detail. Now it means her coats are hit with a devastating tariff. Her business, which sends half its inventory to boutiques in Boston, Chicago, and Aspen, is now facing a crisis. She is caught in the crossfire of a political battle she has no part in. Her story is representative of the real-world pain felt by the minority of Canadian businesses caught outside the USMCA's protective umbrella. They support their government's tough stance, but they are the ones paying the price. The owner must now decide whether to absorb a cost that will wipe out her profits or abandon the American market she spent a decade building. This is the human cost of the trade war. It's the anxiety of a small business owner fighting for survival, and the fear felt by her employees whose jobs are suddenly at risk. They are the economic casualties on the front lines of Canada's fight for a fair deal. The pain from that Quebec factory flows directly south. For a boutique owner in Aspen, those Canadian-made winter coats are a star product. His customers seek them out, willing to pay a premium for their quality and style. He has just gotten off the phone with his Canadian supplier, who has given him the bad news about the 35% tariff. The store owner is now facing his own impossible choice. He can't simply raise the price of the coats by 35%. His customers would revolt. He can't absorb the cost himself without losing money on every sale, and he can't easily find a replacement. There is no American-made equivalent with the same cachet. This is the boomerang effect of the Trump tariffs. The policy intended to punish a Canadian factory is now inflicting direct harm on an American small business. This store owner in Aspen now has a hole in his inventory, a decline in revenue, and a group of disappointed customers. He, like thousands of other American business owners who rely on the deeply integrated North American supply chain, has become collateral damage in his own government's trade war. The weapon fired north has once again caused an explosion in America's own backyard, leaving American entrepreneurs to sweep up the pieces. A trade war that began with a roar of American power has been met with a surprising Canadian calm. Instead of buckling under the pressure of punishing tariffs, Canada has called the president's bluff, choosing a path of quiet resilience and internal fortification. The bold countermove has thrown the White House off balance and left the future of the North American partnership hanging in the balance. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.